A black woman stumbles upon a crying white child, lost and alone. Driven by compassion, she steps in to help. But what she uncovers is beyond belief. The boy is the secret heir to a billionaire empire, and his life is in danger. How did he end up here? And can she protect him before it's too late? This story is filled with twists that will leave you speechless. The city streets buzzed with activity as people hurried to their destinations, heads down and minds focused on their own concerns. Among the sea of rushing strangers was a kind-hearted woman named Denise, a black woman in her mid-30s. Denise had a quiet strength about her, the type of person who noticed the things others overlooked. A stray cat, a discarded piece of art, or in this case, a crying child sitting alone on a park bench. Denise was on her way home from work, a tote bag slung over her shoulder and a coffee cup in her hand. The moment she saw the little boy, though, her pace slowed. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in clothes that looked expensive but were slightly rumpled. His tear-streaked face tugged at her heart. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Denise asked gently as she approached. The boy looked up, startled, his wide blue eyes meeting hers. For a moment he didn't say anything, as if deciding whether to trust her. Finally he shook his head. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Denise set her coffee down on the edge of the bench and crouched in front of him, her expression soft and reassuring. "What's wrong? Are you lost?" The boy nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. I can't find my dad," he said between sniffles. Denise's heart broke a little at the sight of his trembling hands clutching a small toy car. She glanced around the park, scanning for anyone who might be looking for him, but no one seemed to pay them any attention. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," the boy replied, his voice quivering. "Hi, Ethan. My name's Denise," she said with a warm smile. "Do you remember where you last saw your dad?" Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening on the toy car. "We were walking, and then I turned around, and he was gone." Denise could feel the panic radiating off him. She sat down on the bench beside him, keeping her tone calm and steady. "Okay, we're going to figure this out. Do you know your dad's phone number?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head again. "He usually calls for me. I don't know it by heart." Denise bit her lip, thinking quickly. "What about your last name? Do you know where you live?" "Carter," Ethan said softly. "Ethan Carter. And we were staying at a hotel, but I don't know the name." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Denise couldn't place it. She decided not to press too hard. He was already overwhelmed. "That's okay," she reassured him. "We'll figure it out together." As Denise tried to piece together what to do next, she noticed how people walked past without a second glance. It infuriated her. How could anyone see a crying child and not stop to help? "Are you hungry?" Denise asked, reaching into her tote bag. She pulled out a sandwich she'd packed earlier but hadn't eaten. "It's peanut butter and jelly. I promise it's good." Ethan hesitated, then nodded shyly. Denise handed him the sandwich and watched as he ate, the simple act of eating seeming to calm him down. "You're really nice," Ethan said suddenly, his voice quieter now but more stable. Denise smiled. "You just look like you needed a friend," she said. "We all need a little help sometimes." The sun began to set, casting golden hues across the park. Denise knew she couldn't leave Ethan here alone, but she also wasn't sure how to proceed. Something about his demeanor, his clothes, and even his last name made her think there was more to his story. "Ethan, would it be okay if we go talk to someone who can help us? Like the police?" she asked gently. Ethan's eyes widened in fear, and he shook his head quickly. "No, I don't want to go to the police." Denise frowned. "Why not?" They can help us find your dad. They'll take me away, Ethan stammered, clutching his toy car like it was a lifeline. Denise placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Nobody's taking you away, Ethan. I promise. I'll make sure you're safe. Ethan looked at her, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. Finally, he nodded. As Denise stood and held out her hand, Ethan hesitated before taking it. Together, they began walking toward the edge of the park, the first steps in a journey neither of them could have predicted. A journey that would reveal secrets, danger, and a connection that would change both their lives forever. Denise led Ethan out of the park, her mind racing with questions. Who was this boy? And why was he so afraid of going to the police? She glanced down at him as he clung to her hand, his toy car still firmly gripped in the other. "Do you feel okay walking for a bit?" Denise asked softly. "We'll head toward the main street and see if we can figure something out." Ethan nodded, his small legs trying to keep pace with her. As they walked, Denise tried to make small talk to ease his nerves. "What's your favorite toy? Besides that car, of course." Ethan glanced at the car in his hand and smiled faintly. "This one's my favorite. My dad gave it to me." "It's a pretty cool car," Denise said, smiling back. "Your dad must know you really well." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice growing quieter. "He's the best." Denise felt a pang of sadness for the boy. Clearly, he adored his father, and being separated from him was tearing him apart. As they reached the bustling main street, Denise paused, scanning the area. She spotted a small diner with bright neon lights and decided it would be a safe place to sit and regroup. "Let's go in here for a bit," she said, pointing to the diner. "We can figure out our next steps." Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon greeted them. Denise guided Ethan to a booth in the corner, away from the crowd. A friendly waitress approached, her notepad in hand. "What can I get for you two?" she asked, with a warm smile. "Just some water for now," Denise replied. "And maybe a piece of pie for him." She glanced at Ethan, who nodded shyly. As the waitress walked away, Denise leaned forward. "Okay, Ethan, let's think. You said your last name is Carter, right? And you're staying at a hotel?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, but I don't know which one. It's really big, though, and there's a fountain in the front." Denise's mind flickered with recognition. A big hotel with a fountain. It sounded like one of the luxury hotels downtown. But why would a child from such a wealthy background be wandering the streets alone? "Do you remember anything else about the hotel, like the name or what it looks like inside?" she pressed gently. Ethan thought for a moment. "It's really fancy," he said, "and there's a lot of gold stuff everywhere." Denise's stomach turned as a thought occurred to her. The name Carter and the description of the hotel sounded familiar. She remembered hearing about a billionaire family named Carter on the news, a family known for their extravagant lifestyle and philanthropic efforts. Could this little boy be connected to them? "Ethan," she said cautiously, "does your dad have a lot of people working for him, like security or assistants?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but I don't like them. They always tell me what to do." Denise's suspicions deepened. If Ethan was part of the Carter family, his disappearance might already be making headlines. She needed to tread carefully. As Ethan nibbled on his pie, Denise excused herself to step outside. She pulled out her phone and searched for Ethan Carter missing. Within seconds, an article popped up with a picture of Ethan and his father, a man identified as James Carter, a billionaire and CEO of a major tech company. The headline read, "Billionaire's son missing. Authorities seek public's help." Denise's heart raced as she scanned the article. It confirmed her fears. Ethan was the son of James Carter, and he had gone missing earlier that day. His father had offered a massive reward for any information leading to his return. She glanced back through the diner window at Ethan, who was quietly eating his pie, completely unaware of the chaos his disappearance had caused. Returning to the booth, Denise sat down and smiled reassuringly at Ethan. "Hey, I think I might know where to start looking for your dad," she said gently. Ethan's eyes lit up with hope. "Really? You can find him?" "I think so," Denise replied. "But I need you to trust me, okay? We're going to figure this out together." Ethan nodded, his small hand gripping hers tightly. For the first time since meeting him, Denise saw a flicker of relief on his face. What Denise didn't know was that her decision to help Ethan would put her in the center of a dangerous web of secrets and lies, one that would test her courage and compassion in ways she never expected. The sun had set by the time Denise and Ethan left the diner. The streets were bathed in the orange glow of streetlights, and the city seemed quieter, though Denise's mind was anything but. She had confirmed Ethan's identity as the missing son of billionaire James Carter, but the situation wasn't as straightforward as returning him to his father. Ethan clung to her hand as they walked toward the downtown area. Denise glanced down at him, noting his nervous energy. "You're doing great, Ethan," she said gently. "We'll figure this out." "What if my dad's mad at me?" Ethan asked, his voice small. Denise stopped and crouched to his level, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I don't think he's mad at you, sweetie. He's probably really worried and just wants to know you're safe." Ethan nodded but didn't look convinced. Denise could see there was more weighing on his mind. The sun had set by the time Denise and Ethan left the diner. The streets were bathed in the orange glow of streetlights, and the city seemed quieter, though Denise's mind was anything but. She had confirmed Ethan's identity as the missing son of billionaire James Carter, but the situation wasn't as straightforward as returning him to his father. Ethan clung to her hand as they walked toward the downtown area. Denise glanced down at him, noting his nervous energy. "You're doing great, Ethan," she said gently. "We'll figure this out." "What if my dad's mad at me?" Ethan asked, his voice small. Denise stopped and crouched to his level, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I don't think he's mad at you, sweetie. He's probably really worried and just wants to know you're safe." Ethan nodded but didn't look convinced. Denise could see there was more weighing on his mind. As they approached a bustling intersection, Denise paused. Downtown was just a few blocks away, but she didn't feel comfortable heading straight to a luxury hotel with Ethan. She didn't want to risk drawing attention or putting him in a vulnerable situation without knowing more. "Ethan," she said, "do you know why you and your dad were at the hotel?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "We were supposed to go to a meeting. My dad has a lot of those." "What kind of meeting?" Denise pressed gently. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But there were men there. They didn't like me being around." Denise's brow furrowed. Something about the way Ethan described the situation didn't sit right with her. Who were these men, and why would they object to a child being present? Spotting a nearby bench, Denise guided Ethan to sit down. "I want to help you, Ethan, but I need you to tell me everything you can remember about today," she said, "even if it doesn't seem important." Ethan fidgeted with his toy car, his gaze fixed on the ground. "We were at the hotel," he began slowly, "and my dad was talking to some men in suits. They were yelling at him. I didn't understand what they were saying, but it scared me." "What happened next?" Denise asked, her voice calm but focused. "My dad told me to go play in the lobby. He said he'd come get me when he was done," Ethan continued. "But he didn't. I waited for a long time, and then I went to look for him. That's when I got lost." Denise's stomach churned. Ethan's story hinted at something far more complicated than a simple case of a lost child. The fact that his father had sent him away during a heated meeting suggested he might have been trying to protect him. "Did you hear anything else? Anything about what they were arguing about?" Denise asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, but one of the men looked really angry. He kept pointing at my dad." Denise nodded, piecing together what little information she had. It was becoming increasingly clear that whatever had happened to Ethan's father wasn't an accident. If those men were involved, Ethan could be in danger too. Denise decided it was time to take a different approach. She needed to get Ethan somewhere safe while she figured out the next steps. Pulling out her phone, she searched for a nearby shelter where they could spend the night. She found one just a few blocks away and decided it would be a good place to regroup. "Come on, Ethan," she said, standing and taking his hand. "We're going to find a safe place to rest for a while." Ethan looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are we still going to find my dad?" Denise smiled reassuringly. "Of course we are. But first we need to make sure you're safe, okay?" Ethan nodded, his trust in her unwavering. They arrived at the shelter, a modest building tucked away on a quiet street. The staff greeted them warmly and provided a small room where Ethan could rest. As he lay down on the cot, clutching his toy car, Denise sat nearby, her phone in hand. She began searching for more information about James Carter. The news articles painted a picture of a successful but secretive man, known for his business acumen and philanthropy. However, a few stories hinted at controversies, disputes with powerful rivals and whispers of deals gone wrong. Denise's gut told her that Ethan's father's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. And if these powerful men were involved, finding James and keeping Ethan safe would be more dangerous than she had anticipated. As she looked at Ethan sleeping peacefully, Denise made a silent promise. No matter how complicated or risky this became, she would do everything in her power to protect him. What she didn't know was that the answers she sought would lead her straight into the lion's den. Denise barely slept that night. She sat by the dim light of her phone, piecing together fragments of information about James Carter, Ethan's father. The more she uncovered, the more uneasy she felt. James was a public figure with deep ties to the tech industry, but recent headlines hinted at trouble, accusations of corporate espionage, lawsuits, and powerful enemies. It wasn't hard to imagine that Ethan's father could have found himself in a dangerous situation. By the time the sun rose, Denise had a plan. She needed to contact someone who could help. A journalist or an investigator who could uncover what happened to James Carter without putting Ethan in harm's way. But first, she needed to reassure the boy that everything would be okay. When Ethan woke up, he looked around the small room with sleepy eyes. Denise smiled at him from the chair where she'd been sitting. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said gently. "Morning," Ethan mumbled, clutching his toy car. He hesitated before asking, "Did you find anything about my dad?" Denise crouched beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Not yet, but I'm working on it. We're going to find him, I promise." Ethan nodded, trusting her completely. His quiet bravery inspired Denise to stay strong, even as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. After breakfast at the shelter, Denise made a call to a local journalist she knew from her neighborhood, someone she trusted. His name was Marcus, and he had a reputation for exposing corruption and uncovering hard truths. "Marcus, it's Denise," she said when he answered. "I need your help. It's about a missing child." Marcus's voice was skeptical but intrigued. "What's going on?" Denise quickly explained the situation, leaving out Ethan's location for safety. Marcus listened carefully, his tone growing serious. "James Carter's son. That's not just any missing child, Denise. If what you're saying is true, there's a lot more to this story." "That's what I'm afraid of," Denise admitted. "Can you dig into it? Find out what happened to James and why Ethan might be in danger?" Marcus sighed. I'll see what I can do. But Denise, be careful. If the wrong people find out you have Ethan, it could get messy. I know, Denise said quietly. That's why I need answers fast. While Marcus began his investigation, Denise took Ethan to a nearby park to give him some normalcy. They sat on a bench, watching the ducks swim in a small pond. For a brief moment, the world felt calm. Do you think my dad is okay? Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Denise turned to him, her expression gentle. I think your dad loves you more than anything, and I think he'd do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Ethan nodded, though worry lingered in his eyes. Denise wished she could offer more reassurance, but the truth was, she didn't know what they were up against. That evening, Marcus called back with news. Denise, I've been digging and it's worse than I thought, he said grimly. James Carter was last seen at a business meeting with representatives from a rival company. There's speculation that the meeting got heated, and some witnesses claim he left abruptly. No one's seen him since. What about the men Ethan mentioned? Denise asked. The ones who were arguing with James? Marcus hesitated. That's the thing. Those men work for a powerful conglomerate with a history of, let's just say, questionable tactics. If James crossed them, there's no telling what they might do. Denise's heart sank. What do we do now? Keep Ethan safe, Marcus said firmly, and don't let anyone know where you are. I'll keep digging, but you need to stay off the radar. Denise thanked Marcus and hung up, her mind racing. The pieces were starting to come together, and none of it boded well for James or for Ethan. She glanced at the boy, who was drawing on a piece of scrap paper at the shelter's common table. He looked so innocent, unaware of the storm brewing around him. She sat down beside him, her resolve hardening. Hey, Ethan, she said softly. Do you trust me? Ethan looked up and nodded without hesitation. Of course. Good, Denise said, because I'm going to make sure you're safe, no matter what. Ethan smiled at her, and for the first time, Denise felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know how this would end, but she knew she wouldn't stop until Ethan was reunited with his father. As the night settled in, Denise prepared for the next steps. She would have to be smart, careful, and above all, brave. Because what she didn't know was that the men who had targeted James Carter were already looking for Ethan, and they were closer than she realized. The following morning, Denise woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the small table beside her. She grabbed it quickly, careful not to wake Ethan, who was still curled up on the cot. The name Marcus flashed on the screen. Marcus? She whispered, stepping into the hallway. Denise, listen carefully, Marcus said, his tone urgent. I found out more about the men James Carter was meeting. They work for a conglomerate tied to some dangerous underground dealings. Word on the street is they're looking for Ethan. Denise's breath caught. Looking for him? Why? My sources say Ethan might be more than just a bargaining chip, Marcus continued. James Carter was in talks to expose some of their illegal activities. Ethan could be the only leverage they have left. Denise's mind raced as she tried to process this new information. So, what do I do now? You need to move, Marcus said firmly. If they're looking for Ethan, staying in one place is too risky. I'll try to coordinate with the authorities to get you somewhere safe. Denise nodded, her hand trembling as she hung up. She glanced back at the room where Ethan was still sleeping. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. Denise packed what little they had and gently woke Ethan. Ethan, sweetie, we need to go, she said softly. Ethan rubbed his eyes and sat up, clutching his toy car. Why? What's happening? Denise crouched beside him, her tone calm but firm. It's just safer if we move to another place, okay? But I promise, I'll keep you safe. Ethan nodded, trusting her completely. Together they slipped out of the shelter and onto the quiet morning streets. Denise decided to head toward a bus station on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the most comfortable plan, but it would be harder for anyone to track them. She held Ethan's hand tightly as they walked, her eyes darting to every shadow and stranger. As they approached the station, Denise felt a chill run down her spine. A black SUV was parked near the entrance, and two men in suits were standing by it, scanning the crowd. They looked eerily similar to the ones Marcus had described. Denise turned quickly, pulling Ethan behind a nearby pillar. "Ethan, we need to go another way," she whispered. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Just trust me," Denise said, her voice steady despite the panic building inside her. She led Ethan down a side alley, her heart pounding. The sound of footsteps behind them made her freeze. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw one of the men following at a distance, his eyes fixed on them. Denise gripped Ethan's hand tighter. "Run!" she whispered, and they took off, weaving through the narrow streets. The man shouted behind them, his footsteps growing louder. Denise's adrenaline surged as she pushed forward, determined to keep Ethan safe. Spotting an open door to an old warehouse, she darted inside, pulling Ethan with her. They hid behind a stack of crates, both of them breathing heavily. Denise placed a finger to her lips, signaling Ethan to stay quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse as the man entered, searching for them. Denise's mind raced. She needed a way out, but the exits were limited. Then she spotted an old metal ladder leading to a small loft area. She motioned for Ethan to follow her, helping him climb silently. As they reached the top, Denise's phone vibrated again. It was Marcus. "Denise, I've got help coming your way," Marcus said. "I alerted James Carter's security team. They're tracking your location now." "We're hiding in a warehouse near the station," Denise whispered, "but one of the men is here." "Stay put," Marcus instructed. "Help is minutes away." Denise hung up and held Ethan close, whispering reassurances to keep him calm. Below, the man continued searching, his footsteps methodical and deliberate. Every creak of the old building felt like it would give them away. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching outside broke the tension. Voices shouted, and the man inside froze, realizing he was outnumbered. He bolted for the door, but it was too late. Denise peeked over the edge of the loft to see a group of men in black suits entering the warehouse, James Carter's security team. They moved swiftly, apprehending the man and securing the area. Moments later, one of the guards called up to her. "Miss, it's safe now. You can come down." Denise helped Ethan climb down, her legs trembling with relief. As they reached the ground, a tall man in an expensive suit stepped forward. His face was a mixture of relief and emotion. "Ethan," he called out. "Dad," Ethan cried, running into the man's arms. Denise watched as James Carter embraced his son tightly, tears streaming down his face. She felt a wave of emotion as the boy's fear melted away in his father's arms. James looked up at Denise, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Denise said softly. "He's a special kid. I just did what anyone should do." James shook his head. "You did more than that. You protected him when I couldn't. I'll never forget that." As the security team escorted them out of the warehouse, Denise felt a sense of closure. She had kept her promise to Ethan, and though the journey had been harrowing, it had been worth it. For Ethan, it was a reunion with his father. For Denise, it was a reminder of the power of compassion and courage, and how even the smallest acts of kindness could change lives.